when you go through reception, which is how you enter prison, they strip you naked, and that was the lowest. That was my rock bottom.
Okay, I'm excited to hear your speech. I have no idea what you're going to say in it. So,
What the speech?
Yeah.
It's a lovely story of a human who started off in soil that was very arid. You couldn't really grow much in it in an environment that this person grew up in. Not many options, not many pathways that were clear to him. Everything was in the long grass. And but he managed to do very well at school. And the reason he did very well at school, he had a very troubled home life. So school was a safe space for him. And he became very good at sport. He became very sporty because sport was after school activity. So anything that could bolt on or extend his day at school. So he loved the school timetable. He tried to make it. He'd go in on Saturdays. Even at primary school, in the summer holidays, he'd go to summer school, which was 3 additional weeks in school, which was a little bit of studying, a little bit of play, but anything to be away from his domestic environment. He was the first in his family to go to college, first to go to university, and first to get a degree. And once he got his degree in 93, he then decided that he wanted to, use his law degree that he got. But he was confronted with a world that hadn't accepted people like him into the legal fraternity. So there were lots of barriers and blocks in his way. And he ended up working in a mailroom, in a post room, for £10,000 a year, throwing letters into pigeonholes. The basement of a building, oddly enough, on the Old Bailey, so very close to the Central Criminal Court. And he did that for a few years, sort of progressed a little bit into the business, but in 96 decided that he wanted to leave the country. Went travelling, saw the world for 3 years, worked overseas in New York, Sydney, Singapore, and came back and fell into the wealth management or the financial industry here in the city. And again, was working in support because people like him weren't in the sort of consultancy side or advisory side of the business. And the company he worked for initially had never migrated someone from support into the consultancy side, but he was the first. And the first year that he did that, he was the best newcomer to that particular company. Second year, he was voted one of the top 50 consultants pan Europe. And there were 6,500 consultants across Europe, and he was in the top 50. He then started to build a career where he was very successful, very well rewarded and remunerated, and on paper, on his Facebook account, it looked like he was living the dream, the fast cars, the lifestyle, the yachts, lots of sunshine pictures. But internally, something was misfiring, and so if you looked at it as an engine, one of the cylinders was misfiring, wasn't firing, and then another cylinder stopped firing. But again, the car was still moving, his career was still going upwards. And then in 2012, the year of the Olympics, that was probably the summit of his career. And then things started to destabilise and crumble. He was faced with a discrimination case at work where he felt he was unfairly treated and singled out. He took that to tribunal. He lost that tribunal. And from there, things just started to collapse at a much faster rate. And people used to say that you only wake up when you hit rock bottom. The problem is you don't know when the bottom is, and it's a proverbial sort of statement. He then worked in hospitality, trying to cover the sort of tracks, because by this time he had addiction issues, the stress of the job, the lifestyle, the culture of the city. He had serious drug addictions with cocaine and alcohol. And he then fell off the hospitality. It would then got to a stage where he wasn't bringing in the money to camouflage his sort of addiction issues, so it was now directly affecting his family. So because he was spending more time at home, they could see the impact it was having on him. He lost his family, his wife and 3 children, and they separated. He then lost his mother under very sort of horrific circumstances, and then became homeless. He was a rough sleeper for around 18 months, and he was sleeping in his car. And then one of his friends said, look, you can come and live with me, but you've got to drop all your addictions and all of that. So he worked on himself, got himself off the floor, but because he was scraping at the bottom, he was subject to lots of people that he wouldn't normally have come across. So he fell into the wrong crowd. Eventually he had a car crash, and that was a fatal car crash, and that led him directly to prison. He was sentenced to 8 years, but he got 6 years because he pled guilty, and then he spent 1,096 days in prison. And in prison, the first day that he went into prison, he couldn't make a phone call. He didn't know how to make a phone call, so all of his qualifications, professional knowledge, none of it helped him when he got into prison. He was just a prison number, and that was A1965EJ. And he then had to start thinking quickly on his feet, how do I survive in prison? Because at that stage, he wasn't thinking about thriving, he was just thinking about surviving. And he slowly worked his way and started to understand how prison works, the rhythm, the community of prison, or the vibe of prison. And he then left Pentonville, which, Pentonville is one of the most notorious prisons in the UK, if not the world. He was on a wing which had 1,000 men inside it. So when you unlocked, when it's free flow, you get 1,000 men. A lot of testosterone is unlocked at that precise moment. And he managed to work in the education department there, was editor of Voice of the Ville magazine, became enhanced, so there's categories in prison that enable you certain privileges. So he was enhanced, which was the top category. And then he was what they call transferred or shipped out to HMP Onley. And he spent 13 months in Onley, in Rugby, where he became prison council chairperson, which was a trusted position. He was the red band, which was there was only one person in the prison that was the red band, and that was somebody who was a postman, where you're allowed to go into any wing with your job. So you're trusted to go from wing to wing. And he was a call centre mentor, so he worked on campaigns for Scottish Power, Over Energy and Bulb. And then his ambition was to get to Stamford Hill, which is an open prison where you can start rebuilding your life in the community. And the problem he had, because he was based in Rugby, there was only one bus a year, because we were now in lockdown, where you could get transferred to this prison. So 884 men are fighting for 4 seats. He managed to get himself on that bus in August 2020, was shipped out or transferred down to London. He does recall that when he crossed the Dartford Bridge and he saw Canary Wharf for the first time, which is where he grew up, he did cry because he was that close to home. He hadn't seen London in pretty much 13 months. And got to Stamford Hill, again, bottom of the sort of ladder at Stamford Hill, nobody knew him. Became the OMU support worker, and then became prison council chairperson. Once lockdown had lifted, he started working out. He worked at an electronic car hire company for a month. Then he worked at an IT company as an IT director here in Cannon Street. So he was travelling from Sittingbourne to Cannon Street. And it was on his journey back to prison that he came across a company called Radical Recruit on LinkedIn. So he was one of the few prisoners that was permitted to have social media or LinkedIn on his particular phone, and he saw a short video clip, oddly enough, of a lady called Emma, who's the founder of Radical Recruit, doing a podcast about why it was important to employ prisoners and the benefit to business and society employing prisoners. And that captivated him because that's what he wanted to do when he came out, because he'd already been helping. He was an agent of change inside prison and helping a lot of prisoners on their journeys and making it slightly easier, because everything in prison is written down. And if you can't read or write, you struggle. And he started following Radical Recruit, and got involved, volunteered, CV workshops, that kind of stuff. Got to know the team, Emma, Kirsty, Holly, and Alicia and Chris. And then towards the end of 2022, Emma, asked him to come down to Tooting where she lived and have a chat with her, and said, look, Jazz, you pretty much are doing everything that we would have an employee to do. Why don't you come and work for us? So we joined Radical Recruit in March of this year, and the story of A1965, as I've just alluded to, is my own. So that story is me reflecting on my journey from prison to becoming a director at Be Radical.
Okay, but you didn't do the mic drop moment that you usually do.
No, I know. I kind of stumbled on that towards the end.
Do you know how long that was?
As in how long?
How many times have you said that speech?
It's not a speech. It's just what I'm trying to do with people. So I work in the sort of social value, social change sector, where I'm trying to redefine people's paradigms in their minds of what a prisoner leaver looks like. So I've done webinars. We do one. It's quite an infamous one, or we call it a famous one, where we say, why do reformed drug dealers make the best salespeople? And I'm usually suited and booted for that, and it says on my title, Jazz Singh, Director of Partnerships, and I've still got that sort of banker swagger, so to speak. So people look at me and think, it's just a regular, director. And what they can see is I'm a person of colour, so I'm of Punjabi heritage. They may be able to detect that I'm over 50, and most people find that a shock, but 52 in October. What they can't see is I've got a hearing disability, hearing loss in my left ear. What they can't see is that I'm a rough sleeper. What they can't see is that I'm a prison leaver. So in their minds, I'm just a regular director. So I do this reveal, this mic drop, to make their minds shift that actually a prison leaver doesn't look like a big black person wearing a hoodie, carrying a knife. It could be anybody. And my journey in prison is I saw everybody in prison, from foreign nationals to local people, and all ages, all sizes. It was the Bertie Bassett's all sorts sort of army, and you couldn't define people. There was overrepresentation of people of colour, of ethnic people compared to society, but that's a wider conversation on why there's more representation of people of colour in prison. But no, so I've said it a few times, and it's done for impact.
Yeah. No, I meant how many minutes do you think it was? Because you were like, sometimes it's 10 minutes.
Oh, it depends. Got it to 5. It depends on the audience. I mean, sometimes people, because it depends on when we have these virtual meetings, it's the companies will say, we've got, half an hour window and there's 6 people that have to do intros. So I do a 2-minute version.
Yeah.
Other times it's, if it's a long format, we've got an hour, it's a webinar, I'll give them the full. And if I'm the sort of lead facilitator, so if I'm doing a day's workshop, they'll get the 15-20 minute version. They'll get all the gubbins of my poverty-stricken childhood and sharing a bath with my siblings and all that sort of stuff.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, so how long do you think that one was?
I would say 6 minutes.
It was 10.
10.
Okay. So let's get into it. I had so many questions as you were speaking. But, well, first, before I ask how did you grow up, which you already alluded to a bit, why do you think someone should hire a prisoner?
Well, it's prison leavers, and the classic term is ex-offender, and we've redefined it to prison leaver. But let's use the old adjective ex-offender. Everyone focuses on the second part of the word, offender part. The critical part are the first 2 letters, the ex-offender. That's who they used to be. That's who they were. And they've clearly been caught and punished, and they've served the time. That's why they've been released back into community. You're never allowed back in the community unless you're risk assessed. Irrespective of whether you just sat out every day. If you sat on your hands for 10 years because that was your sentence, you are still risk assessed at the end, whether you're still fit to go in the community. Not that Not as if you just have to sit there and just get through the time. You have to do work. But a lot of people that I met did some fantastic inner work, because when you're inside, you're just a prison number. You're no longer a father, husband, brother, whatever it may be. You're just a number. And you can use that silence to do some real deep dive work on who you are. And I also ask the question, which I repeatedly ask, is how did I get here? Because irrespective of my childhood and my upbringing, prison was never something that I foresaw coming towards me. I probably danced along the line of the law a few times, but I always stayed on the right side of it. And so I never saw myself getting into that situation. What I did see when I was inside is a lot of natural intelligence. Maybe not academic intelligence or certified intelligence, but I just thought these people had natural intelligence. And then when I look at what they did, there are a lot of transferable skills from their illegitimate activities to legitimate operations.
Like drug dealing? Or...
Well, drug dealing, but just, I used to call a lot of the lads entrepreneurs. So because of my background in wealth management and because I was an elder, I kind of got left in a category where I could be a font of knowledge. So therefore people came to me to learn something. And so the energy was normally very calm and they were very open and receptive. So they would open up to me a little bit. And I earned their trust. They'd seen me help other people and thought, okay, well, he actually doesn't want anything. So a lot of things in prison are transactional. I'll do something for you, but put some money in my account, or get your friends to, or put some mackerel, which was a currency in prison, tins of mackerel. That's a currency, or tins of tuna.
Why?
It just is because there's a lot more protein in mackerel. And obviously when you're in prison, everyone's on a protein chase because they want to be the henchiest guy in prison. So mackerel, because you can't carry cash, you're not allowed cash or anything, so mackerel became a currency. But I never charged anybody anything, even when I helped them or I cooked for them. It was basically, I don't want anything for this. There cannot be a monetary or a mackerel transaction involved, because it dilutes what I'm trying to do and what I'm trying to put out there. So I saw lots of talent. And I just called them entrepreneurs. They had all the skills of an entrepreneur. So, if let's use the drug dealer analogy, you're probably good at handling pressure if you're selling drugs, because you've got the police sort of watching you or chasing you, whatever it may be. You've got other rival gangs or other rival drug dealers that don't want you to, they want to break your line, as they call it. So you have to deal with that pressure. You're probably good with cash flow, because they generally have enough money to buy stock. They are probably good with logistics, picking up their stuff, dropping it off, cutting it up, putting it into smaller proportions. It's probably usually got good people skills. And I can say from experience, they're very good at sort of persuading you and sort of tempering it, when they turn up late. Because one thing they're not good at is punctuality. They're never good at timekeeping. So if a drug dealer says, I'll be there in 10 minutes, you normally say, can you give me a chair and a book? Because it won't be 10 minutes. But they always say, I'm on my way. And, so they're good at handling problems. These are all skills that if you ask an employee, give me an example of when you can handle pressure. They generally, I had to do something at a deadline and I got it done. Compared to, I had to pick up my drugs and the police were watching me. I had to, and that pressure is much more intense. And I'm not condoning the illegal activity. I'm just drawing out the traits or the attributes of the human. And whenever I spoke to people, they genuinely said, Jazz, if you could show us, we'd believe it. So a lot of it is show and tell. They need to see it to believe it. And because there aren't too many, let's call it beacons or icons for them to see, they kind of go, well, it's not for me, it's a dream. And none of us walk on the yellow brick road.
As in the offenders are saying, I will consider a real job if it's actually possible for
Absolutely,
me.
100%.
But they just think there's no way they can.
Well, the prison population generally is people of colour. In particular, people that live in the care system or they have a trauma-based childhood. It's normally a significant event. They're raised by a single parent. They didn't do very well at school. And now, and I use London as a reference, there's a lot of grooming of younger children who are just walking around, and they make them what they call yes men.
To be part of gangs.
Yeah, because in a gang is run like a business. You have a hierarchy, a structure, and they just show them a little bit of TLC, and that's what most of these humans want. They just want a bit of TLC. They want someone to believe in them and say, actually, you can do this. Yeah, and I've got living proof because I'm working on a project that's live at the moment where we can see this transformation happening. So when I was inside prison, I tried to get people to what I call transform their mindsets. So when they used to moan at me, and they did it quite often, they said the food's terrible inside prison. And I'd say, yeah, but it's probably better than starving to death. Which they would acknowledge, that actually, although it was terrible, and it pretty much was pretty grim, half the time you wouldn't feed it to your dog. And that's not me saying anything anti towards pets, but it was horrific food. Or they'd say, oh, the bed's really uncomfortable, can't get a good night's sleep. And I'd go, well, it's better than sleeping on the street in winter. And just to get them to acknowledge, and also we were in prison in the UK or in England. And, I remember meeting one lady in Pentonville, and she was pretty high up in the education department in the South African prison system. And I asked her the question, I said, what did you think of the cells in Pentonville? So Pentonville was a 200-plus-year-old prison. It was the first prison designed in the UK for rehabilitation. But when you go there, you've got this, what I call the energy of death. So they used to hang people inside the prison. Lots of people have died in the prison. And that energy is there. And the cells are very small, 2-man occupants by and large, and generally with only a wash basin as washing facilities, and then you have showers on the landing. And I asked her, I said, what do you think of the conditions? She went, well, they're really nice, which surprised me, yeah. And I said, well, what do you mean they're really nice? This was in 19. We had quite a hot summer. I was living on the 5s, which is the 5th floor. So all the heat's rising up from the building, and I've got a hot tin roof above me, just baking me. So I kind of feel like I was living in an oven, a pizza oven. And she went, oh, no. She goes, in that size cell, we'd have about 20 people. And there'd be a king of the cell, and every night he'd choose a queen. And that made me realise it's not so bad here. And that was her being authentic. She goes, that's what it's like. And, you see pictures of prisons in South America or in Southeast Asia, South Asia. They're completely different. So although it was grim, and it was grim, it wasn't as grim as it could be.
Although you saw someone get murdered, didn't you? Yeah,
we did, yeah. We saw somebody get sprayed up in the showers in Pentonville. And
what does that mean?
Well, basically is when you get unlocked, that's where most of the violence happens. I mean, to paint a picture of what prison looks like, you've got staff walking around in riot gear inside a very secure prison. So that's the level of violence you're kind of dealing with. They're wearing helmets, riot shields. And so I went for a shower on association. So associations where you've got an hour, pretty much do everything you need to do, which is clean your cell, make a phone call, have a shower, try and get all the bits and bobs you need done to keep your admin or your administration stuff done. So any general application, everything's written down, so you have to write stuff down. So it's a pretty hectic 1 hour, and I went for a shower, and all the showers, they're not divided, they're just open. And I'm in the corner shower, just having my shower, and kids come rushing in and stripe this kid. And what striping means is they're using a toothbrush with loads of blades.
Oh my God.
And they sharpen plastic, make homemade shanks, and just literally went to work on this kid. And your first reaction isn't to save the kid, it's to leave the scene, because if you're caught in the room, you're part of the problem. And so I had to just literally leave the scene and walk back to my cell.
And was he okay?
No.
He died?
He died, yeah.
I was thinking, thinking of someone else that you said who died in the gym.
Oh, in the gym. That wasn't at Pentonville, no. That was at Onley.
Okay,
Yeah.
But that was another murder.
Yeah. So gym's another dangerous time because you've got people carrying weights. And if you drop a weight on somebody that's bench pressing, it's pretty horrific.
And basically people can get away with it because it's like they do it in a group, so no one...
You do it in a huddle, yeah. So everybody works out all the blind spots because there's always a blind spot in prison. That's how stuff gets moved from A to B or somebody's not watching. And if you've got a mass group attacking, surrounding somebody and one person, because it doesn't matter who's carrying the weight, yeah. If you can't prove joint enterprise, yeah, because don't forget, these are criminal convictions. It's got to be beyond all reasonable doubt. And there'll always be doubt.
Even though there's cameras and everything.
Even though there's cameras, even though there's staff. And there's a golden rule, is you don't snitch, because the phrase is snitches get stitches. And also you don't know what's going on. So the problem with controlled prisons like Pentonville or all of the London prisons, especially now, you've got a lot of gang warfare. So you may end up going to prison with somebody that might have killed one of your friends or associates. So there's a lot of that goes on. So half the time you don't know why there is a problem. And sometimes it could be just simply it's a postcode war because this postcode doesn't like that postcode. And then it all kicks off.
Okay, and these aren't necessarily the people you're advocating for employment. No,
it's, I think anybody can change. I think anybody's got the capacity. As humans, we have the capacity to change. Again, prison is no different to society. You've got peer pressure, you've got bullying, you've got all of the things that go on the outside. But if you've got somebody one-to-one, and they could be truthfully honest with themselves and says, if you were given an opportunity, would you leave this path? And they'd probably say yes. And that's when you can work with them. Not everybody is gonna want that change. Some people enjoy the lifestyle. They enjoy the ego is too big, so they enjoy all the glamour that's associated with being a criminal. Some people are actually career criminals. They'll go, look, I'll do 4 years. I'll buy and sell drugs. I'll make some money, and that's more than I can make on the outside. So I'm happy to sit here so that I'm making it, £100,000 a year, which they couldn't make outside. But if you give somebody a genuine opportunity and say, look, here's a pathway, all you've got to do is put a little bit of work in and keep building it yourself, keep curating and cultivating that future pathway, most people will take it. Because when they are alone and in the still of the night, that's when the inner voice kicks in. And that's what happened to me. Is my ego was pretty big when I was in banking, and I pretty much thought I had the Midas touch. And what I didn't realise was that everything that looked like gold and glittered wasn't gold. It was actually just coal that was sort of polished and sprayed as gold. It was actually coal. And so I genuinely have the belief structure that if you show people there is an alternative, the vast majority will take the alternative, but they need to see it to believe it because they're leaving their comfort zone. They know what being in crime looks like. They know how to handle the prison estate. What they're looking to do is go outside of their comfort zone, but that's where the growth is for them. But they need some beacons. Say, well, he did do it, so if he can do it, I can do it. Mm. And because there's so few beacons, they don't believe in it. And even when they start the journey, there's a lot of doubt. There's a lot of management. So Be Radical and Radical Recruit in particular, we do a lot of what we call the soft services. The stuff that employers don't see is how we support people outside of the role. So we call it the onboarding process. We'll get a radical. A radical is somebody that is marginalised or somebody that's protected by law or outside the Equality Act. So rough sleeper, prison leaver, ex-military vet, domestic violence survivor, or someone that's left the care system.
Okay, and that means you're allowed to discriminate. Or employers discriminate against those people, and it's not protected by law, like sex or
race
is protected.
That's right. You've got the 9 protected characteristics, So gender, race, disability, being
Pregnancy.
neurodivergent. But then you've got characteristics, the intersectional characteristics. So if you're a prison leaver, that's not protected by law.
So people can say, no, we don't hire.
Absolutely.
Prison
Well, one of the questions, and again, it's about the balance between managing risk for your staff and your employees and reputation, but also, being a truly inclusive and diverse and, what I call equitable employer. So Richard Branson was a prison leaver.
Really?
Yeah.
What did he do?
He did VAT fraud. He spent 1 night in prison.
Stephen Fry. Stole credit cards.
Yeah. You've got, rightly or wrongly, Nelson Mandela. Spent 27 years in prison, then Robben Island.
Anthony Joshua.
Yeah.
Who
AJ,
gets to travel internationally.
And then you've got Mahatma Gandhi. You've got some big icons there who have transformed their lives post-prison. And all I'm looking for is society, we use the word ex-offender. The first 2 letters are the important part. But if I wrap the word EX with the word NT, most of these employers could be paying a weekly or a monthly wage to the next offender. And they seem to be, you're fine until you get caught doing something you shouldn't be doing. But as soon as you get caught, you're discarded. And there is so much talent in the talent scrap heap. So there's what I call rubies in the rubbish. And I met those rubies. I talked to them, I conversed with them. And as I said, we're working on a project right now where I'm seeing it evolve in front of my own eyes. The true transformation that we can have if we support with curiosity and an open mind humans who have made a mistake but want to get back into society and rebuild their lives, not just for themselves but for their families, but also for society at large. Otherwise, you're kind of saying, you might as well tattoo on my face, don't ever employ me, I made a mistake X, Y, Z years ago, I spent a long time thinking about it, I've done all the courses to rehabilitate, I've got certificates to prove that I can demonstrate my remorse and what I've learned, I've got X, Y, Z testimonials from prison staff. It all means nothing because I made a mistake once. And that's the bit where society, I think, needs to rehabilitate its mind and do the inner work it needs to do. Because we're still using a very Victorian sort of mindset. They're a crook, they did it, they're going to do it again. And that's where the hamster wheel of offending kicks in. Because if you go through the gates, as we call it, when you leave prison, and you haven't got shelter, you haven't got an income, how are you going to survive?
Mm. Yeah, well, I saw there was an article in the FT today about employing more prison leavers, and it said, there is appetite for employers to hire people, but a lot of the time it's like they can't find a place to live. And that was one example of someone who, a project manager, was ready to hire all these people who they came on day leave, whatever, to do. Rottle, and then he had to live with his boss for 6 months because it was he couldn't get housing.
Well, absolutely. So one of my key drivers for Be Radical and Radical Recruit is to try and get these men employable. So when you get to a Cat D or open prison, you're allowed to leave prison on, it's called a rottle, release on temporary license. So again, you're risk assessed. So you're in your sentence and you're risk assessed to leave prison. I used to leave prison from 6 a.m. till 9 p.m. And I used to come up to London, work for the day and then travel back.
And it's work experience, you don't get paid.
No, it could be both. You can get work experience, which is training, or you can get paid. I was getting paid.
Huh.
Now, from the employer's perspective, they're getting, in my case, senior manager, senior leader for a business for trainee wages, But from a prison leaver's perspective, you're getting money where you're not having to pay bills. So some of that money does go to the prison estate. So 40% is paid into what we call the victims levy. So it's good for society that prison leavers who are eligible and risk assessed appropriately to leave prison, that go and find work. So they leave, and DHL is one company that work with a lot of prisoners. Boots is another, and Timpsons, have always had an association with the prison leaver community. So there are companies that are doing this and seeing the benefits of this, because what you're getting in return is somebody that's fully committed. They'll turn up every day, because the other option is they're going to stay in prison. Yeah, they're going to be on time, because if they're not on time, they get a report back to their prison that they're not here on time. And you've then got the situation where when they're at work, they'll adhere to their licence conditions. Now, the vast majority follow that.
Because they'd never be able to do it again if they...
Well, when you fail or when you breach your licence conditions, you can get kicked out of open conditions, and it has happened. 80% of the prison estate in open don't leave open prison. They get kicked out before then. It's designed to make you fail. There's more laser lines in a decap prison than anywhere else. So although it's open and you've got all this freedom, you can walk around, there's more opportunity for you to mess up. You're watched with a much stricter eye. Even though the illusion is you're free, because you're unlocked at 8 in the morning, you get banged up for half an hour at 12 while they prepare lunch, and then at 12:30 you're unlocked again pretty much till 5 o'clock. Then 5 o'clock, again, they bang you up for half an hour to prepare for tea. And then you're open from 5:30 till 8 o'clock or 10 o'clock, depending on what prison you're in. And then it's lights out. And so there's a lot of freedom in the day for you to enjoy. But equally, there's a lot of chance for you not to. And when you're out in the community, you're a very strict licence condition. So if you turn up late, you have to let the prison know that you're late or there's a delay. And they can assess that. So actually, you're always late. You've been late 3 times. So we think that you're a flight risk. So therefore, we're going to put you back into closed conditions. And I saw more people get put back into closed conditions than actually leave the estate. But what it does show is a real good filtering system for those that are ready that can step out, as we say, every day, stick to their licence conditions, go out and do an honest day's work, come back, hopefully stack some money for their eventual release date. So when they do release, they're not relying on the local council's housing department. They can rent their own space. They can continue with their employment or find new employment, with a reference. But to get people to that stage, you need to prepare them in closed conditions and start getting their mindset as in, you are here on your orbit and this is where you want to get to. So these are the steps you need to take. And again, I never had that conversation when I was in closed condition. Nobody sat me down and says, look, you're here and this is probably the worst part of your journey. But there is a route out. You can escape this hellhole and go to a different hellhole that's less hellish. And this is what you need to do. You need to behave, you need to turn up and contribute and be a positive member of the prison community. And then you'll be eligible to be shipped out. And then when you go there, you repeat the process. But eventually you want to get to open. So in rough figures, and they're not sort of precise, there's around 95,000 prisoners in the male estate. And there's roughly about 5,000 in open. So you can work out the pyramid. And of the 5,000, as I said, 4,000 won't leave the prison. 80% will fail. So only 1,000 will be released each year from the open estates. But it's a great filtering system. It also shows people that to get to DCAT is an achievement. And then once you're there, you can start rebuilding. And that's why, for an employer's perspective, as I said, you're getting someone that's highly committed, wants to make a change in both themselves but the environment around them, will be loyal to work, willing to learn, very respectful. So I can't recall the amount of times I said yes miss or yes sir to people that were half my age, but that you get into that, and I still carry it on now. Thank you miss. When I talk to people at the bank and all that, I still have that institutionalized thank you miss, and they kind of look at you with quizzical eyes like you're twice my age. And so there are a lot of benefits in discipline, which again you won't get in the outside world. And when you're stepping out, it's a beautiful thing because it shrinks your sentence. So when I was stepping out fully, I was probably spending 2 whole days in prison where I had nothing to do, where I was actually in prison for 2 whole days. Because the other 28 days I was stepping out, or I had my rottles, I had my home leaves, my day release. So on average, I was spending Monday to Saturday I was working. So I was only having one weekend where I had a couple of days where I was in prison. So that just, when you have those, you go, I've just done another month.
Yeah.
And it's also a good time for you to catch up with everybody else. So it becomes like, a run around where you're trying to catch up with how you're doing, how you're getting on with work. So with the talent shortage that's out there, companies need to start looking at prison leavers or people in prison and then, it's great CSR for the employer. Corporate social responsibility. It's great ESG. It's great for your DEI stats. Because generally you're bringing people that have either neurodivergent elements, people of colour, people from the care system. Intersectionally, it's great for your DEI ratio. But it's also, most importantly, it's the right thing to do. If somebody has served their time respectfully and done the inner work, they should be welcome to society. And that's where I go back to. Society needs to look at itself on why it doesn't rehabilitate and allow ex-offenders to come out, prison leavers to come out and be embraced back into society, because that's where they want to plug in. They want to plug into that, if they're a square Lego piece, they want to plug into a square Lego. And what comes out is they're a square Lego piece and they're trying to fit into a round hole and they can never fully get in. And that frustrates them, that they've done all that work to get to that point. They've gone through a tough journey. And when they come out, and that's why we say the sentence never stops.
Mm. And it's also about breaking cycles, right? Because I guess a lot of the people in there, they're just born into this and they, the other options aren't available to them.
They're born into environments where they're almost funneling towards the prison sentence. And that could be their peer group, the social economic class they come in, the social value, capital value they have is very limited. Again, they don't have too many beacons. A lot of them are raised by single mums, so they don't have that male role model. They fall into gang culture where it's like, it's us against them. So all of the signposts indicate they're gonna end up in the prison estate. And when you meet people, they have similar story and similar pathways and milestones to everybody else. They come from a poor background, poor education, poor structure of discipline, and pretty much left to their own devices to roam. And they join a gang because they get all of the elements that are missing, because they've probably got abandonment or trauma issues they haven't addressed with. And again, I had significant trauma from my childhood. And what I would say to people is, if you don't do the inner work, if you don't lift the bonnet on who you are, you will struggle to understand where you are. So, people say, what's your purpose? And I always say, well, you've got to ask the first question, or the preliminary question is, where are you on your purpose journey? And so most people don't do that. We just plough along, keep striking off our to-do list, rather than wondering, why are we striking this off our to-do list?
And where are you on your purpose journey?
Well, I've kind of illuminated it when I was inside. So my index offence was the worst thing to happen to my victim's family and to my victim. And my friend said it to me. He goes, "You've created about £1 trillion worth of karmic debt. And no matter what you do, every week you put a fiver down against it." Like, he goes, "You'll never outlive the debt, the karmic debt you've created." But it doesn't stop me putting the fiver down. So my remorse is still inside me. The judge that sentenced me said the remorse will stay with me until I die, but he can see clear evidence that I'm in full remorse. So I'm out here literally firing on all 12 cylinders, fully balanced in my mind that I have to be of social worth and value. That I'm not only trying to change society's viewpoint today, I'm trying to change society's viewpoint for 10 generations down the track. That's the legacy that I'm trying to build with the work I'm doing with Be Radical and Radical Recruit. Is I'm trying to affect humans that are not yet born, but in a positive way. Because if I help brother Jack, for argument's sake, and get him into a better shape so that he can stand up in society and he can be part of his community, his future children will benefit from his dad being a role model, and then it increases. And I'll use my own analogy. My parents were illiterate when they came to the UK. My dad pretty much stayed illiterate. I've mentioned that I was the first to get to university. Wore cufflinks for a living, not overalls. And, it's not about what I'm about to say next, but, my children go to private school. So in one generation, we've gone from illiterate grandparents. I went to a state school and then to private education for the children. I now know that it's pretty likely that all of my grandchildren and children's children will go to a private school. And again, it's not about the privately educated, but it's about the flip that can happen very quickly. So I know that if we give people the right soil, the right encouragement, the right support, they will thrive. And if they thrive, their children thrive. And then it's a ripple effect. And then you're lifting people out of what I call true poverty so that they can actually breathe above water, and then they can start making plans for the future. And then they'll want to move away. So, I try and bash bias because there's a lot of bias and discrimination out there, whether it's conscious or unconscious, but it definitely is there. So a lot of the work we do is about re-educating people about this is who humans are, because they're humans first, and if we all treat everybody as a human first, you try and bring everybody back to the same level. Yeah, you have privilege and you have poverty. And what we try and do is get people to acknowledge their privilege, and just flip it around so that privilege is a power, and start using your privilege as a force for good, force majeure for good. And then when you're in poverty, is to throw ropes down. I use this strap line. It's okay to look down on people. It really is. As long as your arm's outstretched and you're pulling them up. That's the only time it's okay to look down at people. Otherwise, you need to see everybody as equals.
So, going back to how you grew up, I have lots of questions about your journey. Because obviously there's been a journey. It's not...
Yes.
It's... Because the first question that comes to my mind is was there a point where, how long did it take for this attitude to come? Was there a point when you were like, this is, game over, I've destroyed my life? And
I mean, the flip point, the pivot moment. Yeah, there's a saying in life, you only wake up when you hit rock bottom. And it's a very sort of proverbial saying. It's an analogy because you don't physically hit a rock, but you do ask yourself why is this pattern of behaviour repeating itself? Why do I keep self-harming myself through my actions? And then when I had my index offence, that was my rock bottom. That was the moment where I thought, okay, I need to stand up and be a different human. And it was when I was sentenced at Pentonville. So I have full acceptance of what I did, and I, pled guilty and supported the police and the courts with anything I could do to make it as swift as possible. And I just wanted to serve my time. And that was the moment when I was in Pentonville, is when you go through reception, which is how you enter prison, they strip you naked and they get you to squat. And they usually stick a mirror to make sure you're not concealing anything. And that was the lowest, that was my rock bottom, is when I had to stand up naked in front of humans I didn't know. And, you were dehumanized at that moment. That's when you didn't feel like a human. And that's the moment I realised I needed to stand up and be the king that my mum gave birth to. And so from that moment, it was almost like a hairy caterpillar just crawled into Pentonville, and what left Stamford Hill was a butterfly. So I've got a lot more grace, a lot more of a light touch, but I can withstand the strongest of storms and still course correct to where I want to get to. So for me, my rock bottom was the index offence, and when I was sentenced in prison. I've got to be honest, the first few weeks I was trying to get over myself, because you're in shock, you're in grief, you're in loss, and there's a lot of emotions. You're also in an energy bubble, which is the prison, where you've got lots of people feeling the same way. There's lots of anger, angst, so it's a supercharged environment, and that's one of the side effects of going to prison. people talk about being institutionalised, and to a certain degree, there is a wash of that in me now, because you can't go through it and not be unscathed. One of the superpowers that I've picked up is I can read energy really well, so people's aura. Because when you're walking down a landing, you don't know if the person that's walking towards you is going to spudge you or stab you, or just ignore you. And to do that,
what does spudge mean?
No, you know the old spud, the old fist, the fist spud, and fist bump, and is so you read energy really well. So I can tell very quickly when people are being authentic and telling the truth.
And how did you feel like about what you had done and about like towards the victim's family? Did you like, how quickly did you think like, I just have to do something for society and I can never like bring this life back?
I think when it first happened, you're just in shock. You're just in the PTSD phase, I think. And then you know what's coming, it's a custodial sentence. You just wanted to sort of go through it. It took a long time for me to get processed. I'm not sure why. And it was pretty much around 13, 14 months from my index offence before I was sentenced.
And what were you doing in that time?
I was released under investigation. So because I wasn't seen to be a threat to society, I was released while the police investigated.
Because it was drink driving, basically, right?
It was drink driving, and speeding. So it was death by dangerous driving. Was my index offence. And
what does index mean?
That's the offence. So that was the index offence that I committed. So basically, it's the criminal act that sent me to prison. And so initially, you're in shock. And for me, I had to try and function. I had some injuries I had to overcome. And there's a very loud voice, and that voice is, and I use a tree as an analogy. I've taken a leaf off a family tree. That leaf will never be replaced. It will always be missing. So you've taken a human off the planet accidentally. You cannot be human, I don't think, without that affecting who you are. So I carry the remorse in me. It's the fuel, it's the candle, it's what burns inside me brightly. Only I see it, only I feel it. It's what gets me, we talked about me sleeping fast, my sleeping pattern. I go to bed late, I get up early, I sleep fast because I've got a lot to do in a short space of time. And I do it in honour of my victim. I do it in honour of his family. I do it in honour of my children. I do it in honour of society and lots of people. The last person I do it for is for me. I'm the last on my list. I do it because I have to be a force or an example to others, not a warning to others. And to do that, I've got to, as I said, I've got so much work to do. I pretty much came from my probation meeting earlier today, and I was pressing my probation officer, I need to speak to your manager, because there's certain things that I want to do are outside of the normal probation license, but I want you to see the work I'm doing, and I don't want anything to stop what I'm doing because it will affect me mentally. It will affect my mental well-being if I can't see myself progressing. So I have a huge amount of OCD, ADHD as a result of what's happened. And I'm almost relentlessly driven to do something. And a lot of people find that very overwhelming because they can't understand it. And when I explain to them, this is my motivation. So when people say, what's your why? I explain my sort of backstory and say, that's my why. So I will push back a lot harder than most people when it comes to getting stuff done when I think, this is what I want to do. I want to, let's say, get to the top of the shard, because at the top of the shard is the summit of what I'm trying to do. I will climb the shard. And when you're a barrier or a blocker, with respect and with intelligence, I will try and navigate around you or get you to see that actually standing in my way isn't an option. Because, as I said, society needs to employ more prison leavers. I need to talk to people about drink driving, which is a big culture here in the UK, speeding. And I'm doing a few of those pages simultaneously, but my main focus is let's show society that you can commit the worst crime but come out a better human.
And for context, the breaking your probation is, or not breaking your probation, but changing the rules is to do with going back to prison to be able to talk to prisoners?
Well, there are a number of things, yeah. So one of my license conditions prohibits me from going back to prison. And that is because they think, oh, I might conceal something, I might smuggle something into prison. Given that I never did that when I was in prison, and I've got a lot more to lose now that I'm in the community. So in 2025, my license conditions expire. So I've pretty much got, just under 2 years to go. And my bounce back, as I call it, started when I was in Pentonville onwards. So in 2019, I started my new orbit in life. I call it my Control-Alt-Delete. I rebooted myself then. And I've worked towards that, and now I'm at a stage where I'm asking questions of the probation service that they don't normally get asked. Now, I've got a very supportive probation officer, but obviously she's got limitations on what she can say. So we're talking, I've reached out to one of my sort of previous governors to introduce the work that I'm doing. He always knew that I was going to be a force for good, and there are a lot of signposts. I've got a few letters from the prison governors that I work with saying that, they thank me for the work that I put in and the structure I left behind. But for me is that key question of, why can't I go back to prison and talk to prisoners? Because they couldn't get a better example of me. I'm still on license, but I'm standing in front of them, not as a director, because that's just a title, but as a human that's done the inner work, the transformation from the same cells they're in now. So for argument's sake, if I went back to Pentonville, I'd say, don't wait until you get to DCAT or CCAT or leave here. Start doing the work now. If you build any structure of significance, the first thing you do is you dig the foundations. And nobody sees that because you're digging down. They can't see the majestic building you're going to leave at the end. But you've got to build strong foundations. It's also got to be on granite. And if it's not on granite, you've got to do the moderations to make sure it can stand up and withstand. And so I use the analogy of building a building. What tends to happen is you put the sort of scaffold boards or the hoardings around the area you're going to build in. Then you dig deep. And nobody sees that work. What they see is the finished article. So if you're in closed conditions, I want to speak to people about the work they do now will help them in CCAT. The work they do in CCAT will help them in DCAT. The work they do in DCAT will help them return to society. So when they come out, they could have had 2-3 years of working on themselves, where you come out and the community look at you and go, wow, you're really impressive. Well, yeah, because for 3 years I've been training my mind and working everything in me. Every cell in my body's been working towards this point. But they need to see it to believe it. And I'm not the eureka moment, oh, listen to me, it's going to be amazing. But the more of us that go back to prison while they're on license, that, risk assess to go back and say, guys, 4 years ago, I was in this cell. Not 15 years ago, because, it's all about relevance of time. And if I went to Omni and say, in August 2020, I left here, less than 3 years ago. And in that 3 years, this is what I did. If I went back to Stamford Hill, I left there April last year. Well, this is what I've done in the next 12 months. This is what I've done. I've had 2 directorships, and this is how my life's evolved from these cells. So don't see this as your future. And as I said, none of us walk on the yellow brick road, but I do want to paint a pathway, say that if you do this, this can be the outcome.
Do you think people are more at risk of bullying or whatever if other people in the prison can tell that they're really serious about going to work and being good and getting out? Or do you just have to learn how to play the game? No,
each prison's different. I haven't gone to all of them, but bullying's part of society. There's people that bully on the outside. And this is what people need to realise. Prison reflects society. The problems you have outside, you have inside prison. So there's drug use outside prison, there's drug use inside prison. So bullying is a big part of prison. And the good news is a lot of the work you can do behind your door. So, you can be this sort of camouflage sort of human, or, a chameleon, where, you say X, Y, Z when you're on association for that 1 hour, but then you do the inner work. Because although there's this culture of, there's groups or there's a gaggle of humans that walk around prison, everyone does their sentence on their own. You do your bird, which is your sentence, in your own time. And when you're gone, you're gone. People forget you very quickly in prison. Yeah, oh yeah, I've got you, your best mate and all that. And as soon as you're gone, it's like, oh, he was a dickhead and he was this, that, and the other. There's no true loyalty inside. And I tell everybody that you're on your journey. What's good for you may not be good for this other person, but it's whether you want it. And if you want it enough, you'll put the work in. But again, I might sound like a really stuck record. We have to show and tell. We have to get people to believe that they can be it, and to do that, they've got to see it to believe it. And that's why I think it's important for me to return back to prison while I'm on license, to say to them that this is the work that I've done. Not, I was, 10 years ago, lads, I was here, and I'm an old man with a walking stick. It's about, no. I was in this library, things generally happen in libraries and in chapels. I was in this chapel doing a speech, X, Y, Z, or I was here doing my Sycamore Tree Restorative Justice Program, which, so they'll see the relevance. Okay, well, you were here recently. And as I said, out of the 100 people I may speak to, 80 shouldn't be there. They shouldn't be in the room because they're not going to change. They're stuck in their ways, or they wouldn't see that sort of eureka moment in their mind that it won't light up. Out of the 20, 10 of them go, well, I might do it, and they might try to do it and then fall off. But there'll be 10 that really want to do it. And out of the 10, and I'm not saying it's about me, there'll be one like me that will be the beacon for the next generation. So I'm looking for the one, but I'm also looking for the 10. And, if I speak to 100 people and 10%, take this on, in a few years' time, that 10% becomes a big community. And, so we're not looking at individual isolated cases of success. Okay, this person did very well and they got themselves back into prison. They spoke to the men. It's like it becomes a well-trodden path. And that's when society was actually, there is this amazing, almost like ant pool of humans coming out that are ready to change and be part of society, but also not doing the classic jobs that ex-offenders do. The construction, the heavy lifting, the warehouse, the stacking beans at Tesco's, and there are other supermarkets where you can stack beans. But those sort of jobs. I'm talking about getting people into big brands with real career pathways. Because one thing is getting society and employers to take it on. The second part is, which is what Be Radical Recruit do very well, is onboarding these men into companies and then post-managing them once they're in post. And then cultivating a career pathway, because let's flip it, they're now in work for argument's sake, and you've got a middle manager who might be really good at their job or might have been in the job long enough and they become a manager, but they're no good at handling humans. Then you bring them a trauma-induced human who's come through the prison system, who's very okay, I have a different mindset, and it could be a challenge for that manager to manage that person. So then there's a coaching bit for the manager and for the employer to take on. And that's what we do, is we do a lot of that work at Radical and Be Radical, and that's the soft services, is how do you onboard somebody. We had an example of a rough sleeper, and we got him into work, he was doing really well, and then all of a sudden he was sacked. So we inquired why he was sacked, and they said, he overreacted over what we thought was a minor matter. And the minor matter was that he left a pot noodle in the fridge. He'd eaten half of it and he left it in the fridge. And at the end of the week, he didn't know that, the fridges get emptied, and the cleaner she thought it was just empty. It's like half a pot noodle, and she threw it away. But for a rough sleeper, that was his meal for the night. So for him, and when you take anything from a rough sleeper, it's their personal belongings. It has a much bigger impact. So for him, it was like, that was my meal for tonight, and I'm not going to eat now as a result of that action. So he went into a little minor meltdown. So what we had to do was coach the employer and say, there's a reason why he reacted the way he did and why you saw it as an overreaction. There's a knowledge gap because of his background, because of where he's come from. For him, it was a massive thing. You've taken my property. And when you're sleeping on the street, your property's all you got. And
so he was employed but still sleeping on the street?
He was employed, but no, he still had that mindset of a rough sleeper.
Yeah.
And so he was working and doing very well. But he'd left, as I said, half a pot noodle. He didn't have enough money.
So then what happened?
He got reinstated, after we had the consultation piece. And again, that's where employers, I speak to a lot of employers. You mentioned the FT. There's been quite a lot of, with the talent shortage. We don't believe, by the way, there's a talent shortage at all. At Be Radical Recruit, we do not. We think it's an illusion because there's so much talent that's not being tapped into. There are 11 million people with criminal record, 7 million of employable age. There's got to be some talent in that 7 million. Disability, neurodivergent people. There's all these cohorts of communities, ex-vets. Some of them are all interlinked. So you could be a prison leaver with some of the other intersectional traits. And there just isn't a talent shortage. We're just not looking at it. We're looking for the Russell Group, the Oxbridge, that sort of cohort. Yeah. We say, why do you need a degree to do a job? Is it of relevance to the job? Sometimes we even say, do you need a CV for a job? Unless it's critical that you have experience in a certain field. So if you're a heart surgeon, you may need to have done a few open heart operations. But if you're doing general jobs, can you not teach the talent? If they're willing and able to learn. So there's a lot of campaign because there's a lot of natural bias that comes out in people before you even know, because you don't have to disclose you're a prison leaver or an ex-offender on application most of the time. So there's a lot of companies that ban the box. They don't even ask the question. But at interview they might, and certainly at offer they will do. So we do a lot of work around the disclosure piece. How do you disclose your offence? And that's where we get people to narrate not just what they did, but who have they become as a result of what they did? What's the ripple effect for them internally and how they see the world now? If you've gone into prison, you're probably more likely, with the right support structure, not to commit the offence again, because you know what prison looks like. You can smell it. I can go back to Pentonville, Onley, and to Stamford Hill straight away. Yeah, there's no. I don't have to recall what happened there because it's in me. Yeah, there's a saying that you have to recall a lie because you don't know what you said, but the truth is just there. It's inside you. It's in that CPU of memory that just, okay, this is what Pentonville looks like. And so I just think that society need to do that inner work, that inner peace, just as we do as ex-offenders.
Okay, and going back to you and how you grew up. So, you grew up in Whitechapel, right?
No, I was born in Whitechapel. So, a true brown Cockney. There's 2 hospitals in London you can be born into to be called a Cockney. Maybe 3 if you include Barts, but I'm not sure Barts has a maternity ward. But Guy's and Whitechapel. So I was born in Whitechapel, within the sound of Bow Bells. And I was raised in Bow, just down the road. And yeah, I mean, when you look back on it, at the time you don't realise how traumatic it was because it's just your childhood. And I think as children, we have that super resilience where we wear rose-tinted glasses all the time. But as an adult, and I look back and think, no, I actually had a horrific, and that's why I had so many trauma-based addictions. So, I was running away from myself. You asked the question about the long journey that I had. It was the longest journey of my life, but the shortest distance to travel. Because I had to just do the inner work. I didn't have to go anywhere. What I was trying to do was outrun my shadow, but it was always there. I needed to stand still and do the inner work. And so my childhood, on reflection as an adult, was horrific. So I had a super loving mother, which I think most humans will say, is when I had an alcoholic father who bashed me about quite often. I grew up in streets that were very racist. So we had local skinheads, National Front, BNP, were all things that I grew up with. The police were malignant with racism. And so it just wasn't a safe space to be out and about. But beyond that, there were pockets of moments where you had laughter and giggles, but there was always this undercurrent that in seconds it could be shattered. And we used to use the word split whenever we saw the police or we saw skinheads or people that we thought were going to be trouble. And split was the code word for people of colour to just run in different directions. Because we thought actually if we ran in individual, they couldn't chase all of us. We were safer to just split like a firework. And but the domestic side, my dad was very abusive to my mum, to me. I was the first son, and so I found school a really safe space. And from a very early age, I'm talking infant's age, I found school a safe space. And so I always excelled at school. I found that I've kind of felt the teachers loved me more than my family. So school became like a bosom for me, a place where I could just rest. And I found actually the education part pretty easy. I didn't find it a stretch. I had an older sibling, a sister, so I used to do a lot of her work. So a lot of her homework, I used to demand, let me do your homework. So I was learning 2 years ahead of myself. So the work that I was doing in my year was, okay, that's easy. I'm working 2 years ahead of me. And that went on into secondary school. So secondary school was a boys' school in Stepney Green. And it was interesting because there was a lot of racial tension in the school. So when I got to the school, it was, I would suggest, around 60%, maybe 70% white locals and 30% ethnics. But by the time I left the school, it was around 80% Bengali and 20% the rest of the world. So there was a big shift in those 5 years. But when I first got there was a lot of race riots. We had police vans outside the school gates at lunchtime. Kids would bring in, pieces of wood, 4x2 with like 18 nails sticked into it and swinging it at kids. So secondary school was quite violent. There was a lot of violence there.
And who did you stick with?
As in, because I was neither Bengali or white, I just stood literally in the middle. And so I played rugby, and a lot of the bullies played rugby too, oddly enough. And I was a boffin at school, so I'd be sitting at the front of the class, and normally you'd get things thrown at you. But I had this atmospheric shield around me, where they spent, my nickname was Singh. He goes, leave Singh alone, because we need him on Saturday. He's our fly half, he's our number 10. We need him on Saturday. So I almost got a bye, whereas all the boffins around me would get beaten up and their ties pulled down around their necks. We had something called polling, where they'd grab your ankles and pull you towards the nearest floodlight and keep pulling you until your eyes were watered enough. And so school was, secondary school was quite violent. But again, I excelled at sport. I played cricket. I could have played football for the school, but I chose rugby. Basketball, table tennis, badminton. So I was always doing a sports activity. Again, that kept me away from home. And then I would have to deal with my father when I got home, but I didn't have to deal with him all the time. So yeah, it was a pretty brutal upbringing. The police were never kind to us when we grew up. And I had an incident with the police where I was beaten up in the back of a police van for pretty much no reason.
By a police officer?
By police officers. We used to go canoeing in Shadwell Basin. So we weren't allowed to go canoeing by our parents because they kind of thought we were canoeing in the Thames. And we were trying to say, no, there's a dock. We're not canoeing in the Thames because that would be dangerous. Because we weren't the most proficient swimmers. But we were wearing life jackets and it was a dock inside next to the Thames, Shadwell Basin. So we used to go canoeing in the summer holidays and, muck about, get wet, pretend we were pirates and that kind of stuff. And and then run back, and it's probably a 3.5 mile run back. So we would be soaking wet when we started the jog, and then we would run through estates. And back then you could run through different estates. No one really cared. As long as you didn't find any skinheads on National Front, you were good. And we had a little route that we would take, which kept us away from the main roads. We're running through these estates and laughing and giggling. And I remember a Sherpa van pulled up quite near to Arbor Square Police Station. And, what was going on there. And I was the eldest in the group. So I was the one that he was speaking to. And I said, no, we're just running home. Well, why are you running? I said, because we're trying to dry off. Why are you trying to dry off? And as a child, you just answer the question because you're talking to the police. Because we're not, why are you not meant to? Well, because our parents think we're canoeing in the Thames and it's a danger. We're all going to drown. And they just took exception to the way I was responding to them. And they said, get in the van, and then threatened that they were going to put drugs on me and that I'd go to jail. And I think I was 8 or 9 at the time. And and then decided that they were going to stamp on my face. And damaged my face. I've got little scars on my face here, which have faded over time, but when I was younger they were quite prominent. I remember everyone else had just split, which was, what they had to do. I eventually got home and told my mum what happened, and what the classic sort of syndrome back then was, is you just sweep it under the carpet. We're not going to go to the police because that's not going to help. It's only going to make you a target. And so then you grow mistrust, and that's why I did a law degree. One was I was constantly getting stopped and searched by the police when I was driving for no apparent reason. How could I afford this car? And I didn't know my rights. But there has to be, back then, this is before the Terrorism Act, there had to be a reason for them to stop you. And it couldn't be, what we call the sus law. We think you're suspicious. Well, why do you think I'm suspicious? What act of suspicion is being created? So I wanted to learn the law. And then Stephen Lawrence happened in the year that I graduated. And I used London as 2 sort of timelines, pre-Stephen and post-Stephen.
What was that?
So Stephen Lawrence was murdered by a group of white men, racist white men, in Eltham in southeast London, so not too far from where I grew up. And his only crime was he was at a bus stop. And I have huge respect for Baroness Lawrence, his mother, and their father, because they never gave up on finding the truth. And they battled for a decade plus to uncover the truth. So that was, in my opinion, our version of George Floyd. Although it wasn't linked to the police, because the police have got their own back catalogue of people dying in custody or being shot mistakenly. This was the cover-up the police did, because there were so many clues and evidence that pointed to Stephen's true murderers, but they just brushed it under. They didn't look at it properly. So they breached their duty of care to investigate properly. So there was a report in 1996 by Lord Macpherson called the Macpherson Report, and that identified the police and a number of public bodies as institutionally racist. And those two words have never been put together. We as people of colour knew there was something wrong. So if I was to describe the feeling of discrimination or racism, it's a feeling that arises inside me. It may not be what you said, it may not be what you did, it could be the way you deliver it, it could be the way that you're not delivering it, it could be an absence of actions or a positive action that you've done. But it's a feeling that arises in me where you think, it didn't go down the way it should have gone down. So racism is very hard to intellectualise into words, because it's a feeling that arises. And when we realised that it was that somebody, a judge, a lord, someone of significance had identified the Metropolitan Police as institutionally racist and other public bodies, we then started to have a clamour towards saying, we're not institutionally racist, we're going to do this, that and the other. So companies and organisations started to change. But just like the George Floyd murder, there's only a certain length for the sparkle, and then it becomes old news and it dies down. And so I use the analogy that people have just got more clever or more ingenious in how they cover up their discrimination and their bias.
How did you feel as an 8-year-old when that happened to you?
Well, there was two things that recurred to me from a younger age. A, being told to fuck off back to my own country when I'm standing in the country of my birth. And B, being beaten up by people I didn't know for no reason. So skinheads beating me up quite often. The police, not just me, but other people around us. And that's why there was this huge mistrust, because when my mum grew up, and she grew up in a place called Smethwick in Birmingham, in 1964 there was an election, and it was deemed to be the most racist election in the UK. So people of colour were no longer, this was a local bylaw, Conservative party, local, in the ward of Smethwick. They produced a bylaw that says people of colour could not rent or buy property in that ward. And that was apartheid in Britain in 1964. I grew up 8 years after that. There was a sign in Smethwick that said, if you want to brown neighbour, vote Labour. That became a Hollywood sign for the UK. People travelled from all over the UK to be pictured by this sign. It got so famous that Malcolm X came over to the UK to check out what was going on in Smethwick. And, what is this apartheid? It was on Marshall Street in Smethwick. My mum grew up not too far from there. So we had a similar version, We might have had certain rights, but, if you were getting on a bus, we had to let all the white people on the bus first, So we were allowed on the bus, so it wasn't quite sort of Rosa Parks days, but we were allowed on the bus, but we had to let all the white people on first. Or the bus was full and it would go off.
How did your parents end up coming to the UK?
My mum came to Britain when she was 2. So she pretty much grew up as an English girl. So she went to Shiland Girls' School in Cape Hill, Smethwick. And so it was a girls' school back then. It's a mixed school now. So she had what I call is an Indian and an English upbringing. So she was English outside and Indian inside.
And why did her parents come?
They were invited over, so post-independence in India. So both my grandparents fought in the First and Second World War. So they were invited back to the UK to recognise their services. And my mum's father worked in a foundry in Birmingham, and so they settled there. My dad came, although my grandparents came in the early 50s, my dad didn't come over till 67. So he was the last sibling last child they brought over from India. So he had a lot of, which I identified later on, he had a lot of abandonment issues himself, because his parents moved to another country and left him in India to run that sort of family estate and farm. And
they came for opportunity. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, this was the hot spot of the world. And what they saw was to better their lives, a bit like the Windrush generation. They paved a path. They went through a lot of oppression to pave a path for us. We went through equally some oppression. Hopefully our children go through less, but eventually we want the oppression and the bias to stop. And so my dad came in 67. He met my mum on her wedding day. So it was a fully arranged marriage. My mum saw a picture of my dad. And they got married.
They were from a similar area in India, or their families?
Punjab. They were just Punjabi. So Punjab's a state in India,
and they were part of the Punjabi community in Birmingham.
No, my dad was from my grandparents. My dad's side, they moved to London, East London, so they were in Bow. And I remember my mum saying when she got married, so the M1 hadn't been completed. So now you'd go M1, M6 to get to Birmingham, and M6, M1 to get back down. And so back then they had the M6, then they had the A5. And she goes, it took her about 8 hours to get to London. She'd never left Birmingham since she got there. And she kept thinking, where the hell are they taking me? Because they kept going through all these minor towns and then going back onto sort of country roads. And but she settled in East London. So she had a cross between a Brummie and a Cockney accent, which is quite unique. And she was always happiest helping people. So my full name translates into Warrior of Help in the Punjabi community, and I'm beginning to live into that word, into that name now.
Okay, last question. Wait, before I ask you the last 3 questions, but jumping back forward to prison, going into prison, how familiar were you with the dynamics that you would face in that?
A lot of people said to me, "You'll be fine, yeah? You'll be fine." And I've got to be truthful, a lot of people said that to me. Did I believe what they were saying? 100% no. I was shitting myself, yeah? Is because you have an image of prison, the violence, etc. You know, I wasn't associated with a gang. You know, I had a heinous accident that led to me going to prison.
Because for context, you were basically, as you explained in the beginning, so you were working in banking, doing very well as a wealth manager, living in a massive house with the cars. What cars did you have? You mentioned the cars.
Well, I was a BMW fan, so I had a few more exotic cars, but at the time I had 3 BMWs.
And what were the yachts?
So I had a 34-foot Veneto in the Isle of Wight, and so I used to do a lot of sailing. So my claim to fame is that I've beaten both Ellen MacArthur and Sir Ben Ainslie in a boat race. So around the Isle of Wight race in 2010, which I think was the 150th anniversary of the race. So it's the oldest yacht race on the planet. And although I can technically say I beat them, the truth is that Sir Ben Ainslie hit the needles and stopped, and Ellen MacArthur turned back because it was too choppy and she had children on board. There were 11 Maydays on that particular day, and it took us about 8 hours to finish, but we did beat them. We did finish it. So yeah, I had a lifestyle that was pretty amazing.
But that was all through legal.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Banking.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I mean,
selling tax schemes to wealthy people.
Yeah, tax offensive schemes. And some of them are maybe a bit more dubious today, but you know, we used to always say that this is based on current legislation and the law may change, and the law did change with some of the schemes that we put into place. But no, it was all above legal, all for professional bodies and banks and institutions that are still around now. And so my wealth was accumulated, again, from poverty to top boardrooms. You know, I was at events that I wouldn't have dreamed of going, you know, Goodwood Festival of Speed, the pavilions and boxes at cricket, rugby, motorsports, Formula One. I remember being invited to Rolls-Royce when they launched the Ghost, I think in 2010 or around that mark, where they invited me down to Goodwood, to the factory, you know, got to drive around the Phantoms and the Ghosts. So I was just living a different life. So when I got to prison...
But you were using cocaine and you had a drinking problem. And that's basically how you ended up sleeping rough, is because...
Yeah, because of my addiction. So during my university years, I didn't drink. Yeah, so I was very late to drink. Yeah, because it wasn't my gig.
So your parents Sikh?
They are Sikh. Yeah.
Can Sikhs drink?
Strictly on the Orthodox side, no, but culturally, yes. So, you know, they weren't strict Orthodox, and so yeah, I was late to drink. It wasn't really a gig for me. Again, and it's not, you know, I never point fingers at situations, because whenever you point at a circumstance or somebody, 3 fingers point back at you. One's to the universe, that's the thumb. One's to what you think is the problem or the reason, and 3 fingers point back at you because you allowed yourself in that situation to do this. So I was trying to prove myself to the world that I could get into wealth management and be a success. But I had to pierce a glass ceiling, and I kept hitting my head on it quite often, which obviously depresses me, frustrates me. I still had loads of baggage from my childhood which I hadn't addressed. So the alchemy between my career not progressing and my childhood, you started to drink. There was a culture. This probably still is a culture in the city of alcoholism. If you watched The Wolf of Wall Street, it wasn't too far off that. When I actually watched that film, I thought it was a documentary. There was a lot of gulps going in me. And I had to I was on the outside lane. I had to almost out-party everybody, out-drink everybody, out-drug everybody, out-party everybody to be noticed. Because a lot of the management deals that, we're going to look after you tomorrow, they're not done in the boardroom or in the office. They're done in the bars and the strip clubs in and around London. So I had to sort of stand up in a world that wasn't built for me. And when I did that, I knew I was losing who I was. I knew I was losing the child my mum gave birth to and what my values were. But then I was caught in that crosswind between, that's how you're going to get the money. So, this is something you've got to sacrifice. The problem is once you get into alcohol and you don't feel good in the morning, the man in the mirror, that you don't feel comfortable, you generally repeat the process to get away from what you did yesterday. So now you're on the hamster wheel of addiction. And then someone introduced you to cocaine. This will iron out the creases. This will get you straight and it'll sharpen you up. You start taking cocaine. Oh my God, it's amazing. It straightens you up. And then off you go. You've now got a coke habit. And now you're messing about with women. And you're just a debauched human. And now you look in the mirror. You've got even more remorse, guilt, etc. And then the only way to shut that noise off is you repeat the process. And again, that's the hamster wheel of addiction. What you don't do, and these are all byproducts of a much bigger malignant issue, and that was my childhood trauma, what I'd endured as a child, what my home life looked like. I'd never addressed it. I just carried it around with me as a sack. Then the work pressure, I felt I had to do that to get work, and to a certain degree I did have to behave in that way because otherwise I'd be a brown person. That was, that's why he's different. He's religiously different, culturally different, so we don't like difference. People like themselves. So I had to almost morph myself into a human that didn't exist. So I call it the Facebook profile. You're showing up this image of a human that doesn't exist. You're showing the world how happy you are, how amazing you are, what great restaurants you're going to, what great experience you're having. But the person you don't show is who you really are. And the gap got wider and the weight between the two got heavier. And so my addictions got to a level where my coke addiction was about £5,000 a month, plus my drinking. And at some point it's going to affect your work. What happened to me at work I thought was unfair, which is why I took them to employment tribunal, because there was many comparators where they didn't take the action they took with me. It was very severe, very swift with me. That's when I realised that court's not a playground of truth. It's a playground of proof. You have to prove your case. Doesn't matter if it's right or wrong. If you can prove it better. And I won't go into the intricacies of the court systems being biased. But I had a huge coke addiction and alcohol addiction. And it was more coke than alcohol. At first I had to be drunk to take coke. And by the end of it, I just had to have a couple of glasses of wine or beer and I was on the coke. So coke became the main protagonist. But again, what I hadn't done is had the conversation with myself, which I did do in around March 2019, before I was sentenced, of what is this pain inside me? What is this dark spot inside me? And I remember I was living in Honor Oak, and I was in my bedroom, and I just had this experience where I just spoke to my father. He'd passed by now. And forgave him. I forgave my siblings for what they did around my mum's death because I felt they were clinically negligent towards her because they had clinical responsibilities for her. And I forgave a lot of people that hurt me. I was sexually assaulted as a child. I forgave a lot of people that had hurt me. And I made noises, which it almost comes across as like an exorcism. I was making howling noises that humans don't make. It was literally like a dark spirit coming out of me. And I think at that point I'd realised that I can now walk a bit freer, a bit lighter. I didn't have to have the weight of the past. Because the irony is when I was sentenced, that was the day that I stopped smoking after 37 years of smoking. I stopped taking drugs. I stopped drinking. 6 months or less than 6 months into my sentence, I stopped vaping. I've been teetotal probably for 5 years now from alcohol and drugs. I haven't smoked for just over 4 years. I haven't vaped for nearly 4 years. I've got new addictions. Yeah, they're just not malicious ones. So I'm addicted to helping people. I'm addicted to my welfare, my health. I spend a lot of time making sure that I eat right, sleep right, and go to the gym and be physically active. And so I've transferred the addictions into positive ones. But the most important thing I did is I did the inner work, that real deep dive on what are my own internal barriers and blockers, what's stopping my progress. And I did that in prison. So in prison, it sounds an oxymoron, but I was actually quite happy in prison. Because I knew I was making progress. I knew I was moving in the right direction. There was very few people that I met on my prison journey. There are a few, and we do keep in touch and we do laugh because we say we did it sober every day. We didn't smoke, we didn't drink, we didn't take any drugs, we didn't take any spice. We did it sober.
What spice?
So spice is a drug inside prison which is made up from an amalgamation of bleaches and alloy cleaners and all sorts of stuff. But it's the drug of choice for those that can't afford.
That you sniff or something.
Well, you smoke it, yeah. I mean, people
people can get drugs in prison.
Yeah, there's probably more drugs in prison than on the street. They're just super expensive.
With mackerel.
Huh? Well, no. That you'd use real currency. So, if you were in the prison estate and you wanted a cigarette, it's like £20 for a cigarette. So a packet of I'll give you an example. A packet of tobacco costs about £30 on the street. In prison, it's £500. So that's the markup.
Okay, so yeah, okay. So and you were my point was kind of like, even though you'd been doing coke, and you ended up rough sleeping because then your marriage fell apart. But even though all of that, you were not at all involved in like organized crime or gangs or so facing that stuff. Like, I guess my question was like, how street smart were you going into it, or did you just know you'd have to deal with these dynamics and you just kind of...
No, my friend said to me, as I said, you'll be fine, you're an elder. So I was in my late 40s when I was sentenced. So a very late time to go to prison. They said, look, you're intelligent, you've got natural intelligence, And I think what saved me, and it sounds odd, is my stories were better than other people's stories. So I was a better storyteller. But I grew up in East London, and what I didn't realise is a lot of the sort of secret skills I'd learned as a child would come in handy when I was in prison. So, I can laugh and joke, I can defuse a situation, I could take a lot of emotional charge out of problems. There was a few incidences where, you're faced with a sort of T-junction. Turn left, it's going to be violence. Turn right, you're going to defuse it. So I would use, my natural intelligence or wit, whatever it was, to just look at the situation quickly and say, this is how I'm going to take the pin out of it. There was this, people used to say, put a pin in it. And I say to people, look, save your breath and cool your porridge with it. Yeah, what are we arguing about? So I remember one incident. I was on the fives coming down to the servery, which is where they serve food. And in prison, when you first go in, everything's on a plastic plate, plastic cup, so you generally just taste plastic in everything you eat or drink. I went in, and one of the lads in service says, why do you look so miserable? Big man, they used to call me. Big man, yeah, which was almost a joke because I wasn't the biggest person there. But big man, why do you look so miserable? I said, well, now that you've asked me, I'll tell you why I'm miserable. Because I come down 10 flights of stairs to come and see you, and I come for my food that I have ordered for a menu sheet the week before. And every time I come in, you say, it's not here. Yeah, there's not enough food, there's not enough portions, or the kitchen made a mistake, or someone's taken it, whatever the reason or excuse was. And I would just go, give me my milk or my bread. And you say, oh, your milk's finished, we haven't got enough milk. And you're sitting on a case of milk behind you. And I said, I just find it humorous that you're stealing my food. Now, I've got food, I can survive. I can use mackerel or tuna or whatever I had, pot noodles, to survive. But what makes me laugh is that you think this is acceptable. We're in prison. There's no win-win in this situation right now. But I swear to God, your mum didn't give birth to the human you're behaving right now. Because we come from cultures and heritages where we're kings and queens, We come from big heritage lines. And what we're doing right now is we're acting like rats and we're stealing each other's food. Yeah? How are we going to grow in this environment? So they started giving me the nickname Simba or Lion King. Yeah? They're going, oh, Lion King. Because I said to them, we come from heritage where we've been slaves and we've overcome that. Did they break the shackles of slavery for us to do this to each other? And so it actually inspired me to write my first piece of poetry, which was For Once We Were Kings. And so a lot of my street knowledge came in handy. A lot of my natural intelligence through banking, through dealing with humans, came in handy. And then also my storytelling. And probably what saved me the most is, is to say, well, I teach you how to play the stock market. So, is not in Pentonville, but in Onley and certainly in Stamford Hill. I teach people how to play the stock market. So at Stamford Hill, I used to get the FT weekly. So we would do dummy portfolios. I say, right, by this time I had like 6 months of FT. I say, right, this is October 21. Pick 10 stocks from this. And I want you to tell me why you've picked them. And then I'd tell you, it was a rising market, so I had the wind behind me. And I'd say, if you did that then, you would have made 70 grand now. Oh, well, I said, it's all legitimate. And I used to tell them it's, risk appetite and, asset allocation and stuff like that. And they found it fascinating. And that's when I realised, I said, these people have never been taught this. Because they weren't good at school, so they left school. They found school a place, where there was a lot of natural bias. And, you're the typical aggressive Negro in the background, so we're going to put our energy into these people. And so there was a lot of bias in their environments and this. So they weren't on a platform to succeed. Yeah, they were almost living in quicksand, just trying to stay afloat. So my East End heritage saved me. There's a lot of humour in prison. A lot of Mickey taking, joke taking. I can take a joke and give a joke. And so my dry humour saved me a lot. But equally, a lot of the elders, let's call them the superpowers inside the estate, respected me because they could see that I was just trying to help people. And I didn't want it. Now, some people took advantage of my benevolence, and I acknowledged that, and good luck to them. But the majority didn't do it for sort of ulterior motives. They took it for how I wanted it to be received, transparently. It's an authentic thing that I'm doing to help them. So I think the way I conducted myself helped me navigate it. And apart from one incident, or maybe two, if I stretch it, did I have pinch moments where I thought this could turn into violence against me? Most of the time, people accepted me for who I was. And because I was always in trusted roles, I was almost like a centre of influence on how the wing rang, how the prison rang. So if they had a problem, they'd go, people would say, go and see the CM, the custodial manager. So they'd go to the office, they went, no, go to cell 007. That's where he lives. So they'd come to my room, my cell, and it was like an office. It was all the PSI, the prison service instructions, all the notes, how the prison is meant to be run. And I remember one of my governors says, you're not the prison advocate. I said, but sir, they can't read and write, so someone's got to do it for them. And I think all of those ingredients ensured that I didn't have too tough a journey inside. But having said that, you still had to endure 1,096 days of it.
Yeah. Okay. Last 3 questions. Oh yeah, sorry, because some of the stuff you did, just context, I know we sat down at dinner and you gave me like 4 hours worth of stories. So I know some of this stuff. But one of the things I love is like that guy you helped who ate the same shitty food every day, and you worked out it was because he couldn't read the menu, so he didn't know how to order something else.
Yeah, that was... I was living on the twos, and I could oversee... So prisons are based on landings, and they normally go up. And in Stamford Hill, I was on B Wing. There's 3 floors. Ground floor is the 1s, second floor is the 2s, and third floor is the 3s. And I was on the 2s, and pretty much in the middle. Surgery was to the left, and at surgery time, I generally used to just observe people. So either I would go late to surgery, because I didn't want to queue. The idea of queuing for your food as a grown man just didn't appeal to me. So I thought it'd be easy to just almost like walk in, grab what you want, and then go back. But I remember this lad that moved in, because you do notice movement, so you notice who your neighbours are and when they change, and you start observing them, because you want to sort of almost do a recce on who they are. Are they going to be a problem, a threat, or they're going to be someone that's vanilla, or someone that you're going to associate with? And say 50 plus, very frail, very skinny, and every day he used to just bring back the default menu, which was jacket potato and beans, or jacket potato and cheese, but it was always the jacket potato. And trust me, the potato never tasted like a potato. It was like some chemical potato. And I just kept looking at him going, he must really love a jacket potato. But this went on for like a month or two, and I went, nobody loves potato that much. Like, he literally, everything is default. So we were both wing cleaners, and I used to have a habit of cleaning when everyone was asleep, because although I was a cleaner and, I took pride in how my part of the wing looked, I didn't really want the world to see me doing it. So I'd get up really early. So in prison, I was normally up at 4 a.m, doing my sort of cell routine. And as a cleaner, you could leave your cell, and as long as you were working, it didn't really matter. So I could get that done before. Otherwise, it's really hard to mop when people are walking over what you've mopped. So you want to do it at a time when it's quiet. And he had a similar ethos. He used to get up early to do his cleaning. And I asked him, and I won't say his name, but I asked him, I said, do you mind if I ask you a question? I said, can you read all right? And he went, no. And I went, that's why you're on default, because you can't read the menu sheet. So it occurred to me that maybe the prison needs to ask everybody that gets off the bus into the prison, one of the questions they should ask you is, not how was your trip, is can you read or write? And then allocate somebody that can. So I said to him, I said, look, bring your menu sheet to me and I'll fill it in for you. It'll take 10 minutes, but we've got a lot of time to kill. Yeah, and again, I used to do a lot of benevolent activity because it would soak up my time, my sentence. So I actually felt I was doing something purposeful, which is where I got the joy from, which is how I felt good and happy in prison. I felt I was being of service. And so he came and we did his thing, and I remember him screaming at me, he goes, I've got chicken, Jazz, I've got chicken. And I knew that because that's what we'd allocated, or that's what we chose for him. And he goes, the next day he goes, it was the first time I've eaten chicken in 8 years. And that's what broke my heart. Because I went, no one's actually asked this human, can he read or write? Every day they're serving him potato, potato, potato. And normally when you don't put your menu sheet in, because you're not going to eat it, because you go, actually, there's no point doing it because I'm going to cook my own food. And, in DCAT, you've got a lot more cooking facilities. So there's a lot more ingenious ways of cooking. I used to make a chili cheese pasta. We used to bake cakes and that kind of stuff. So there's a few chefs that, one of the ideas we've got for the future is to write a cookbook for prisoners. So this is how you survive food-wise, because food's a big part of your enjoyment and your journey in prison. If you can eat okay, you can generally start thinking okay. But he got his piece of chicken. I got in trouble a few weeks later because if they said that I was bullying him for his chicken. Because, again, chicken's a currency in prison. You can pay for things through chicken. Because you only get it once or twice a week. So, and then I asked one of the custodial managers, I said, can you ask the cleaning officer to spend 15 minutes a week with him doing his menu? And And then I started to see him thrive. And I'm not saying it was because he started eating chicken or eating a comprehensive menu, but all of a sudden he was getting risk assessed. He started working in a fruit factory down the road and stepped out for the first time. And I remember when he first stepped out, he goes, "Oh, the world looks so different from when he first went in." And so that was one of the stories that I'll always take with me is something as simple as that, stopping and saying, "Can you read or write?" Now, when everything is written down and you have to have a wet signature on everything that you do in prison pretty much, request it, that's got to be a fundamental question. Illiteracy is so high in prison. And again, that's why people struggle. Nobody stops. The rehabilitation doesn't generally come from the estate or the structure. It comes from people around you.
And that was another thing you did, right? Is helping people interpret the prison code or whatever, so guards can't take advantage of. Yeah,
so I wasn't very popular in a number of prisons. So I used to bust their knickings, as we called it. A nicking is when you're in breach of the rules of the prison. And there's a due process that the prison has to follow in notifying. I'll use my own example. I was an enhanced prisoner pretty much most of my journey. And when you're an enhanced prisoner, the reason why it's important is not the status of being enhanced. That's almost irrelevant. It means that you can spend more money. So I could spend £25 or £30 a week rather than 18. And that made a big difference on what you could buy and how you could enjoy your week, how you could cook. And it's
how
always
you
good.
Buy stuff?
So you have something called a canteen sheet. So each week you're allocated, it's called your spends. So money drops down from your account. So people send money in, or you have money through your work. So I used to work, so I used to get, only I was getting paid about £38 a week. So that would go into my spends, and I could draw it down every week, or a certain amount. And when you're enhanced, you have a bigger budget. And you'd always, and I remember I was in prison during the lockdown and pandemic, so things were in sort of scarce supply. So you wanted to stock up on pasta and stock up on rice and that kind of stuff, some staples. And we used to use the enhanced status as an important element. So I was enhanced, and one day I got my canteen sheet and I was standard. And that meant I could spend less. And I said, there's been a mistake. So I pressed the bell on my door to get the officer's attention, because I was banged up then. And they said, we'll have a look at it when you get open. So I went to the office and said, there's been a mistake. I need to spend what I'm normally allowed to spend, and why am I standard? And I was told, unbeknownst to my knowledge, that I had a nicking. I said, what for? And they said, because you snatched the mail out of an officer's hand. They said it was your mail, but you snatched it out of their hands. So I looked at that and I thought, well, firstly, you're meant to inform me, both in writing, that actually you've got a nicking. You're also meant to say it verbally to me that, look, we think your conduct's not appropriate. But when I lifted the lid on it, because I did say to them, I said, well, guys, I think, firstly, this is a huge mistake, because I didn't snatch the post out of anybody's hand. I was walking in one direction, and the officer was walking in the other direction. And she went, there's some post for you, Mr. Dahl. And I went, thank you. And then she gestured it towards me, and I grabbed it, but I didn't break my stride, because I was heading in the opposite direction with an officer, with my officer that does my sort of key holding work. And I said, well, I wouldn't have done it, because he would have said something to me like, why did you snatch it? It's not recorded on CCTV. But putting that all to one side, I said, you should have come up to me and given me a piece of paper that says you've got a nicking. Then you should have said to me, this is inappropriate conduct. And for you to change my category as a prisoner, it has to be a serious breach. But there has to be a pattern of behaviour. And those last two elements don't exist, because snatching anyone's post isn't a serious breach. Punching somebody is serious. Bringing contraband, smoking, all those sorts of stuff, they're serious breaches. And secondly, it was an isolated event. So on those two elements, I knew I was going to bust the case, and I said, do you want to change the system now, because it's literally a drop-down menu, and say it's a mistake, or do you want me to go through the due process? And they all looked at me and said, we need you to go through the due process. So I did. I wrote my letter, did my appeal. I didn't even get to the adjudication, which is the sort of mirror courtroom you go, because the governor, who I worked for at the time, said, "This is ridiculous." And so there was a campaign to try and bring me down a peg or two, because they realised that actually we're trying to get these people nicked, and this guy keeps busting them. I'm trying to think of that Sylvester Stallone character, Judge Dredd. I was almost like Judge Dredd, but in the opposite way. And so I wasn't famous or respected by the staff for doing that, because that was the way they brought you down. And I kept saying, if they did wrong, they know they did wrong. But if they did wrong, you have a due process to follow, and you need to follow it, because that's why it's there. It's for a fair and just outcome. And if you circumvent that because you want to quickly prove a point, and there was almost a, I wouldn't say KKK, but there was a clan of humans that work in the prison service that got a lot of enjoyment in bringing people down and stopping their progress, because they knew it would trigger mental health issues. They knew it would put them in a spiral. And I came in, and I was tested I was tested more by the prison officers than I was by the prisoners, because they said, "We want to bring you down a notch or two. We want to quieten you down." And so when they were when they unlocked cleaners, when I was a cleaner, there was a certain time they would always forget to unlock me, and I had to press the bell, and, "Oh, can you stop pressing the bell? There's no emergency. We just forgot." And I'd say again. And I remember sometimes it's best not to speak to the officers and just keep it civil and minimum, because the more you speak to them, the more opportunity you have to fall foul. So when I was helping them, and I used to help people in between wings, so people would say, "Can you get Jazz?" So they'd call me off the sort of gym area and say, "Can you come and speak to this person?" I'd be like, "Okay, well, look, put it on a general app, or put it in an envelope, mark it for my attention, and I'll have a look at your nicking, and then I'll send it back to you." And so in Onley in particular, and in Onley I was sort of defending people quite a lot, and I did that at Stanford Hill as well. But at Stanford Hill, my true sort of support structure was helping people get ROTL, get them their release on temporary license. So I worked for the OMU department and the offender management unit, and they were the ones that risk assessed you, that if you were safe to go in the community. But to do that, you had to fill in quite a comprehensive form, and there's a lot of paperwork. So I used to almost mentor and guide people and counsel them that, look, for you, if you want to see your children, you've got to behave in this way. You can't get a silly nicking for something silly and mean what. And I say to them, when they did get busted, and quite rightly, I say, you love that more than you love your children. So whatever you say to me, your actions tell me you love that more than your children, and you have to live with that. So we were quite, it was a few of us, we were quite blunt with people and say, you have to own that. You handled your own story because you wrote it. But equally, I got immense joy, in when people would come back to me. And so I used to almost leave the prison every day, even when I was in there. Because people come up to me and say, "Jazz, I met my daughter for the first time in 6 years. I picked her up, we did this, we went there, we had creams and we had this to eat." And I'd just sit there listening, and the wash of their positive energy would fall on me. It's like a perfume or a cologne. They'd spray it on themselves, and I'd be in the backdraft. And I'd just sit there and go, wow, like, yeah. And then I'd manage their mind and say, "You're going to have a chemical crash tomorrow and the day after, because you're on such a high right now. And tomorrow you're going to still feel it, but Tuesday," so it was a Sunday, you'd go into a depression, a dark place, because you'd realise she was this big when I saw her, now she's a lot big. So you'd recognise the gap. So a lot of mind management tools, and that's what gave me the positive reflection of prison, is the work that I was doing, but the impact it had on people around me.
Okay, last 3 questions. How do you stay grounded?
I think I'm anchored for life now because of what I did. And, a lot of people, I used to be a party star, and I was the life and soul of the party. My nickname was the Mayor of London. I knew more people than Boris Johnson. I could go to any restaurant pretty much and never have to queue. Even in Dubai, which made me laugh because I'd never been to Dubai, and went there, and next thing I know, I'm in the VIP area talking to the England cricket team when they were out there in 2012. 12, yeah, I think so, 12. But my index offence my journey, what I did, my remorse that I carry is still an active volcano. And I haven't breached my license conditions. I respect it for what it is. This is all an illusion around me, because this could go tomorrow. I could walk out and someone could punch me in the teeth and I get knocked down. The police turn up and they question who we are. I'm a person on license. I get cuffed and sent back to prison, and then I have to defend myself from there. 6 months will pass. I'll come out. All of this is gone. So there's a lot of pressure around me, but pressure that I find very easy to absorb, because I know I put myself in this situation. So I have a lot of acceptance. And I think the biggest thing I learned is I accept a lot more than I resist. I might push back every now and again, but there's a lot more acceptance. Whereas when I was younger, there was a lot more resistance. Why is this happening? I need to fight this. And I think if it's a cliche, trust the process, trust the universe. It's trying to take you somewhere. It's trying to guide you to a certain spot. And these are all the bends in the river. And, just go with the flow, because the universe is the master teacher, and it's trying to teach you something. And so for me is my index offence, who I want to become and who I'm evolving to becoming are my drivers. And so I have a full 360 view of who I am, but I have hyper focus on who I want to become. And that can come across in so many negative ways to other people, because they see me and think, this guy's weird, he's a nutter. But they haven't, as I said, 3 pages out of 51 pages so far are me in prison. But the journey to get me into prison is a lot longer. The journey post-prison is a lot longer. And prison won't define me, yeah? And it certainly won't confine me. But it is a pivot point where I actually pivoted into a new person from that point. I ricocheted into a new human.
Is there a book that's had a big impact on your life?
There's quite a few. I did a lot of reading in prison, a lot of reading. And I think there's 2, because, it's like choosing a favourite film or favourite song, depending on what mood you're in. But Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning had a tremendous impact on me. I've probably read that book more than I've read any book. It also was given to me at a beautiful time, because I was in prison. And you had to lever yourself out of prison and beyond the fences and live for something that was outside of you. And not worry about when it would end, but worry about at some point I will meet my children. So I haven't had a strong relationship with my family. That's fractured from me. So my ex-wife and my children. I haven't seen my children in more than a year. But I know at some point my blood will find me. And this is one of my drivers, one of my fuels, is that when they do see me, they'll say, well, what have you been up to, Daddy? Well, Daddy's been doing all this work. Because they know the truth, they know why I went to prison. And they were very young when I had to tell them that. And that was probably the most toughest conversation I've ever had in my life, is to tell my children what I did and who I'd become. But Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, and then Dr. David Hawkins' Power v Force. And that enlightens the map of consciousness. And Dr. David Hawkins is deemed to be the godfather of all self-help books. He's up there, and a lot of people cite him as, because he opens up the map of consciousness. And, when we're younger and we're vibrating at a low frequency, we see the world in negative light. And we need to start accepting and seeing the world in positive light, and think actually good is about to come. The universe is a friendly place. And, the analogy is, if you're stuck in a traffic jam, most people will scream, oh my God, this is a pain in the backside, and why is this happening to me? They fall into victim mode. Or they can be the hero and say, God, thank God I've got 10 minutes to myself. Turn off the radio and, just be calm. And so we use the analogy of, is it a pain in the arse or is it an adventure? And that flips into the 2 types of people there are on the planet in my eyes. There are tourists and there are travellers. There are those that see things and those that experience things. And So both Dr. David Hawkins and Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning and Power Over Force, they're probably the two books that I recite the most in my mind. That, there are certain, and these are, both books that are written a long, long time ago. They survived the test of time. There are a lot of offshoots from that. So a lot of modern day self-help books, which, so I call them the classics. They're the Beethovens and Mozarts of this world. They've survived the test of time. And so they're the books, all the sort of self-help, pro-rich books, the Napoleon Hills, they're useful if you want to do something. But for the human spirit, Man's Search for Meaning and Power Over Force.
And finally, what 3 words describe the best version of you?
That's a beautifully tough question. I'm trying to make it cute and put it into 3 H's.
Why H's?
I don't know, because it's the first thing that arose in me. I don't like the word authentic. I think it's overused now. So let's just strip it back to its original word. I'm honest. I'm honest with myself. I'm honest with the people around me. I'm honest with the universe and the things that can't see me. I'm the same behind the scenes as I am in front of the scenes or on stage. I'm helpful. I want to be a person that's helpful. I want to be someone that contributes to society for good. And I want people to look back at my life and think, actually, we're glad he breathed, because he breathed, the world breathed better. And I want to be happy. I think that's important, that I find self-happiness. And as I said, even in prison, there was moments where I was happy. I still can think back to moments where I laughed so loudly that we were crying. Because humour, I think, is a very underrated human trait. Humour can pacify or it can illuminate the most darkest of nights. And without humour, I think we lose a lot of humour. And so they would be the 3 characteristics. Yeah. To be honest, to be helpful, to be happy. And that links into my CAP, The Good Life. Because The Good Life narrates into be kind to be happy. That's The Good Life. And everything else is just dust. Asteroid belts.
Amazing. Thanks for coming on.
You're welcome. And thanks for having me, as they say.